Hi, Vivek. Very good afternoon to you, and welcome to the Factors.ai podcast. Very happy to have you here. We have been talking to a range of people, right, from customer success officers, CXOs, CEOs, founders, the SaaS ecosystem. But we haven't got a content marketing expert yet, and you are the first one to be on the Factors.ai podcast from the content marketing side of things. And we are very happy to have you here because a lot of things can be predictable. A lot of things, right from, let's say, even ABM ads, growth performance ads, and other things, and sales can be very predictable in SaaS. But content marketing is one thing which looks very logical and simple, but at the same time also unpredictable. So very happy to have you here to share your thoughts around content marketing, SaaS, your own experiences, etc. Welcome again.
Yeah, sure, Sri. Thanks a lot for having me. Yeah, I know we met a while back and yeah, glad to do this. Yeah, attribution and everything and sort of tying revenue to content is a bit challenging, of course. So yeah, really excited to be here and yeah, good afternoon to you as well. I should have said
Thank
that
you,
up front.
Vivek. So, Vivek, if you can just start with a brief introduction about yourself, your personal life, schooling, college, how you ended up as a content marketer in the first place, and what does Black
Yeah,
Dot
sure.
Agency do?
Yes, yeah. So I had a bit of a circuitous route into content marketing, not a very traditional route. I studied engineering originally from India. I studied engineering in the States, and then I worked in finance for a while. And eventually, what happened is I started working as a freelance writer. Given my finance background, it was an easy transition for me to make. I was really looking for something where I could be location independent, to be honest. That was my primary motivation. And I'd always written creatively since I was a child. So transferring over to fintech content just made sense. And I was pretty happy to learn that I could make a living with writing because creative writing doesn't pay anything, as everybody knows. So yeah, I didn't know anything about content marketing when I started. I started relatively recently in 2019. That's when I sort of got into freelance writing. And one of my friends actually referred me to a content mill, and I started right at the bottom, right? I mean, I started writing for like 1 cent a word. Basically, I was just churning out tons and tons of words every day. But it gave me the opportunity to sort of travel everywhere and make money. So I was not complaining.
Wow.
And one thing led to another from there. I just started exploring content marketing. First of all, learning that, okay, content marketing is a thing, explored it a bit, and I found it quite fascinating that a B2B company could actually start a blog and get leads in and build a business. Because before getting into content marketing, I had run niche blogs and niche websites before. I sold one as well in the past, so I was quite familiar with SEO to drive sales for like products and stuff, right? But I never thought that a complex B2B platform would ever use written words to sort of drive leads and sales. So that's how I got into it, started exploring things a little bit. And, touch wood, things went well for me. I started writing for some pretty big companies. And at some point, I started getting requests from some of my clients that, okay, can you add a bit more to this beyond just writing? Like, can you help us with the briefs? Can you help us with the overall strategy as well? And I found that I really enjoyed that work. So I worked in house as well for a fintech startup for a while. The startup unfortunately went belly up about 3 months after I joined, so that was a unfortunate experience. But I was their first content hire and second overall marketing hire, so it was an interesting time. A very lean team, obviously, getting everything set up. So that was quite energizing, I found. And I thought, why not start an agency to do the same thing? So around August, September of last year is when I founded Black Dot, basically as a way to deliver high quality content marketing for fintech companies, because it's something that I felt was really needed, because fintech as a niche is not something that content for fintech. Yeah, so last August, September is when I founded Black Dot, because I felt it was something needed for fintech. Fintech content is something that is a pretty hard problem to solve, because it's you need expertise, as well as you need to understand regulatory issues, you need to understand how to present the subject as well, build trust, etc. So it's something that there was a need for it, and that's how Black Dot got started. So yeah.
That's great. So, do you work with exclusively with fintech companies, or fintech SaaS companies as well would also come under the same?
We work with B2B fintech companies.
Mm-hmm.
So some of them are SaaS, some of them are also financial institutions. Basically, okay, I think the resolution on my camera is a bit off, but
Yes.
anyway, yeah, we work with B2B fintech companies. So basically, that includes also a few institutional finance firms. For example, we work with a lot of AML compliance oriented firms. So those are not necessarily SaaS, but yeah, I'd say about 60 to 70% of our client base is SaaS oriented. So yeah.
That's great. So you spoke, of course, fantastic career, right? From engineering and then kind of serendipitously falling into content, working as freelancers, figuring out multiple things, joining a company, the company going belly up, and then eventually starting up on your own content agency. One thing, of course, is like content is also very kind of industry and kind of region specific, because it's like the kind of content which you can write for, let's say, Indian fintech companies or Indian SaaS companies versus kind of content which you have to write for US fintech companies, kind of content you have to write for EU fintech companies or even EU similar SaaS companies and all could vary across the board. How is there frameworks which you can adapt across all this thing, or is it something like totally unique for each and everything?
To be honest, I think content is something that is popular in the States and maybe the EU to a certain extent. I don't know of any Indian companies or even companies in Asia, Singapore or Hong Kong, that actually use content to drive leads. So in that sense, I think content marketing is actually a very small world. Even if you look at the best, most well-known content marketers, I don't think it's a coincidence that all of them have some sort of American connection. It's so in that sense, there's not much diversity, I would say, in terms of writing style, but it does pose a challenge if you're not exposed to that particular culture, I would say. The way an American audience expects to be sold to or marketed to is very different from other cultures, right? So yeah, I think that is a bit of a learning curve in terms of becoming a content marketer, just understanding what your audience wants, what that audience wants rather, and tailoring your language to that and strategies to that.
Got it. So one thing which is always quite fascinating and quite interesting, as you said, is like how content marketing or great amount of content on your website can drive leads, pipeline revenue, and are almost at nil cost. Once you generate the content, once the content goes ranking and becomes this thing, it's almost at nil cost. You actually are able to get value from that content. And this we have seen in several SaaS companies. There are multiple companies, SaaS or even global SaaS companies from India, which do that very, very well. And they have cracked the content marketing code, which is what they talk about. But in your words, what would you call as like the content marketing code? Like, how do you look at, let's say, if you are a startup or a startup fintech company and selling to B2B or other B2B institutions, how do you start bringing up like what would be the kind of brief they say, okay, with this content, I have to, or with our full content marketing strategy, I have to get to this number of visitors on the website. This is the kind of leads I need to generate. Or how do you plan a content marketing strategy, or how do you even pitch to a startup to say that why you need to look at content and what would be the plan and what are the kind of key guardrails you have to keep when you're actually looking at your content and your timeline also for that. And that would be really great for us to know. And then I'll also get into a few other questions around that.
Yeah, sure. Lengthy question, but a good one. So the first thing that I would start off by saying is, you need to figure out whether content marketing is even for you, right? Unlike most agency owners, I would say that content marketing is actually not a good fit for most early stage startups. The reason is because it depends really on where your pipeline is and what stage you're at, or really how comfortable you are with your pipeline, right? So, and I'm just going to give a simple sort of example here. It's just simplifying things, but I think every marketer and salesperson kind of understands that if you have a market, there is a certain proportion of people who are ready to buy your product, and then there are others who need nurturing, right? So let's say, for example, 2% are ready to buy, 98% need some sort of nurturing. You don't need a lot of content to convert that 2%, because they are already problem aware, they're solution aware. They just need a little bit of nudging and some sales collateral really to get over the line. A lot of early stage startups are better off focusing on that 2% because they need the pipeline for growth, right?
Got it.
And once the company matures a little bit, and some early stages do mature, of course, because the definitions are a bit off, but generally companies that are comfortable with their pipeline have shifted their focus in terms of marketing, away from marketing being a back office for sales, more towards marketing actually being a marketing department, right? For example, the CMO is not tasked anymore with conversions, or they're not judged on the amount of revenue that they bring in, which happens a lot in early stage companies inadvertently. um, but focusing on the 98%, if a company is at that stage, that is where content really helps, because it reduces the acquisition cost over the long term, as you said, right? Because there's only so much outbound you can run before just blowing up your LTV CAC and all that stuff. So I mean, it's just not, it doesn't make common sense. So content is really suited for those companies. In terms of developing a strategy, really content marketing is more of a fit for that 98% companies.
Vivek, I think we just.
Hey, Sri, can you
Oh,
see me now?
yeah, I saw a GoPro webcam. I think it's basically the video is a little off, maybe because of that. We can do it audio only. You can switch off your video so that we can have good bandwidth, and I can put it up with your image as an audio. That's something which is totally possible from our.
Well, let's just try with the video a bit. If it still keeps acting up, then I can even switch webcams, because I know the GoPro kind of, it gets a bit dodgy on small lower speed connections for some reason. Anyway, so yeah, in terms of designing the strategy itself, really content works best for increasing brand awareness and just sort of helping people make that decision, right? So it's all about designing the funnel and making sure that you're addressing the right topics, and more importantly, you're addressing the right topics throughout the funnel. So it's not just about taking one topic and saying that, okay, we're going to write an SEO based article about this, because that occupies just one part of your funnel. You need to have something that backs it up. You need to sort of divide information all across the funnel based on the reader's intent, right? What do they want to consume at that point? How aware are they of their issues, your solution, your product, etc.? Depending on that, you do have to tailor your content, and that's where funnel position comes into play. So it's really about going through that exercise and dividing at its very base. If we were to reduce it to just the basics, I would say taking an important subject, and just cutting it up into pieces that is funnel appropriate, right? Depending on how aware somebody is of the solution and their issue. So that's basically what a content strategy is. That's how I would think of it.
Awesome. And actually, one point which was very kind of contrarian to what the general advice we get as startups is like, the first advice is given before you do paid ads, you start with your content. You start building content around your website, about your product, about your value proposition, about your use cases, etc. Ability to even talk about blogs, about kind of like complementary areas, etc. is an advice which is given to a lot of SaaS founders across the board,
Yeah.
and saying that content is a long-term investment. But what you are saying is like, for early stage startups, don't ever focus on content. First, focus on just nurturing the first 2% of your, or 2% of your buyers, which you can bring in directly. And once you reach a certain product market fit and scale, then only a content strategy actually even makes sense.
Yeah, I would say that, you need content at all stages, right? That is not debatable. My point was more that you don't need content marketing, right? Because content marketing is much more than just creating content and throwing up words on a website or videos. So yeah, I think content marketing is more of a fit for that 98% companies. But for that
So
2%,
content
yeah.
So content marketing you define as like SEO driven content, or is it something like a strategic kind of like how, like a story, how a content comes through in multiple chapters for a particular company? Is it what you are talking about, or is it more like what are we missing
That
here?
So content marketing, I would say, it really comes down to creating content and distributing it, right? So
Okay.
SEO is one distribution channel, social media is another distribution channel, and communities which are becoming huge these days. And frankly, that's where a lot of the selling is actually going on. That is another distribution channel. So content marketing is really just sort of creating a strategy around that, right? It's about asking that,
Got it.
okay, what are we going to talk about, and how are we going to get people to understand that this is what we're writing about, or this is what we're talking about. So that's what content marketing is, as opposed to creating a website with copy on it. Yes, you need to understand your ICP, you need to understand their pain points, but you're not really marketing it in any sense, right? You're not sort of, yeah, you might be using SEO and all of these things, but there's no concerted effort there to nurture your audience, or to sort of, how do I say, like, you're not investing as much time in distribution as much as you are in creation. So that is a bit
Creation.
of a
Got it.
difference. That's the way I see it.
Got it. And in this regard, as you work with companies, what would be the kind of like, I mean, as you said, content marketing is about beyond creating content, distribution of content. And it's for companies where they have to nurture the remaining 98% of your visitors. What stage would it be? Would it be like number of customers beyond a certain limit, a revenue stage, or something based on your experience working with companies?
Yeah, I think it's more of a revenue stage, and just being comfortable with the pipeline. Sometimes clients that content works really well for, they have a good velocity into their pipeline, a good number of leads already entering, and they are comfortable with waiting a while. That's the best way I would put it. I can't put numbers to it because as a content marketer, I hate attribution, right? So, well, maybe not hate it, but I don't fully sort of prescribe, sort of believe in it, I suppose. But yeah, just being comfortable with the pipeline and knowing that, okay, we can afford to take some time here to nurture these people and wait for them to become closed ones, right? So
Got it.
I suppose it comes down to a revenue stage. It also comes down to how much pressure there is for growth, because we have a few clients who are not venture backed. They can afford to wait
Got it.
for that nurturing process to take hold. So yeah, it's about just being comfortable with your pipeline.
Got it. And one more thing, this is more fundamental. It's like, as a content marketer, I understand one, it's a very creative process, but what are the kind of metrics you look at as you start developing the content?
Yeah, it depends, I would say, on your goals. So I think every metric has value of some sort. Even vanilla metrics like total traffic coming in. If you're looking at expanding brand awareness, for example, and you have distributed on very targeted channels, total traffic is a very good metric. It's very relevant. But if you're looking at something like, for say lead gen, then obviously total traffic doesn't make sense. Some metrics that personally that I feel are universal is really just the engagement rate, which is a very good addition in GA4 actually. It's just the other side of the coin of the bounce rate that used to be in UA. But engagement rate, and perhaps even customizing that engagement rate to suit your goals, I think that's a very good metric. Also, just, again, this is a vanilla metric, but the number of users, the growth over time. UA used to have this fantastic tree maps report, which I used to love, but GA4 I don't think has that. But just looking at the flow of content, how people are navigating through your website, that report used to give an excellent sort of breakdown of how your funnel is working actually. And if you had your channel groupings, content groupings set up properly, you could actually see your funnel in action. So, for example, you had one particular topic and you were bringing people in at the top of the funnel through SEO, you could actually just receive a very nice report and just see what the conversion rates were throughout your funnel. So that sort of thing, just looking at, how people are bouncing from one page to another within your website, that sort of thing is quite interesting. There's no real name for it, but it's something that needs
Buyer
analysis.
journey, maybe buyer journey analysis or prospect journey
Um,
analysis.
Yeah, I suppose funnel journey analysis, whatever. I mean, we're marketers. We can come up with any sort of name, that's what we do. But yeah, just at its essence, just looking at how people are engaging with your content throughout your funnel. And yeah, basically that. And also, something interesting is for some of our clients, we don't recommend gates for most of our clients. Some of them still run with it, but we always recommend optional gates, which is, if you have an ebook, don't gate that thing. Have an email collection form or contact form next to it, but don't gate it on purpose. So capturing the amount of conversions from forms like that, where people voluntarily give you their contact information. That is something that is also quite valuable because it shows a high degree of intent. So, and then of course, relating that back to how many of them converted into sort of closed ones and what the sales team thought of those leads, those sort of metrics and conversions are also quite important and interesting to track.
Got it. And one more thing, have you used tools like account identification tools like Clearbit or Six and Six Signal and others to identify which kind of companies are coming into content? Has that been a kind of a metric have you ever looked at? Because one is traffic, but also looking at what kind of companies are coming, which industries are they coming in from, what geographies are they coming from? Has that ever been a kind of a
We don't use it personally. We do recommend that our clients use it, to be honest. In fact, a tool like Factors, are a client of ours who's a mutual friend. We know that they use it and they're very happy with it. And frankly, it adds a lot because the state of analytics is a bit poor right now, to be honest. GFO just doesn't give you the same number of insights. So having that additional color on demographic data, where they're coming from, etc., it really is helpful. We do have some clients who use Sixth Sense and de-anonymization sort of software, and those inputs from our clients are very valuable because in certain industries it helps us identify where they're coming from, especially in regtech clients, because their location is a factor in terms of regulation. So it is important to identify those sort of data. So it adds to it. Would I say it's a critical pillar? I don't know. In terms of a strategy, I don't think so. But in terms of measuring effectiveness, it does play a role.
And you made a very important point around gating. You don't recommend gating, but there is something called optional gating where like you just open it up to collect email IDs. If people can still download or access the ebook without actually giving the email ID. How does
Sorry, go on.
that work? How does that work actually?
Well, it's pretty straightforward, really. I mean, you navigate to any B2B website, and I swear I was just having this conversation with somebody, this. This is another agency owner, and he was ranting about how case studies are gated, right? It makes no sense to do that. I mean, yeah, like why would you do that? And I responded by saying that I've seen a few companies who actually gate their pricing pages. Now I can see the thought process behind it. Somebody who's checking out our pricing is extremely curious or whatever, and perhaps that's an intent signal. But yeah, it doesn't make sense to me. So a lot of content is that whole thought process behind gating content. Let's produce an ebook or a white paper and let's attach this form to it so that we're collecting leads, right? Leads in air quotes. I mean, people are used to it now. And to be honest, I have accessed many of these ebooks from service providers who are very relevant to content marketing and content marketing agencies. I always enter a fake email, right? Now, I'm not saying that I am a huge sample size, but if you generally look at the way users behave these days, where everybody wants something quickly, they just want the information. They don't necessarily want to be or have that feeling that, okay, you're tracking them while you're doing all this stuff. People are sensitive to that. I personally believe that gates are kind of headed out the door, and it's not something that drives goals. Really, ultimately, what you want is a strong lead, and I think that making the gate optional, ungate the asset, and then have a form on there anyway saying that, hey, if you enjoyed this, consider giving us your email address, something like that. The emails that you get from those kinds of assets are a lot stronger because somebody's given it to you voluntarily. They found your content useful. And I think it goes back to basic content marketing principles, which is that to to make an impact on your prospect or your audience or your customer, you need to offer utility. And if your content is offering utility, people will reach out to you. That's how content marketing should be done. So that's why, we recommend it. Not all clients follow it. But I think in terms of the evolution, that's the way it's going. I don't see gates being very effective, to be honest. So yeah.
Got it. No, actually, it's pretty interesting because we have seen two paths. One is so far is like either completely gated or it is
Yeah.
something like ungated. But this optional gating where like if you enjoyed the content, please share your email ID. That's something which is interesting because we haven't seen that across the board where like people just say that. This
Yeah.
thing. And that's, I think, would be a good thought or at least an experiment or a A/B test experiment which we need to run. like, okay, if there are optional gating in certain set of case studies and this thing, while if it's non-optional gating as well, how does the user behavior actually, do we get almost the same number of leads, or maybe 15 to 20% less leads but still works, etc., can be very interesting as a use case for us to look at as well. And one other thing which, I mean, as any kind of startup or like any company with a certain degree of revenue and other thing which should be looking at is like, we are investing on content marketing, and content writers are not cheap. And we would be investing on like a couple of blogs a month or 5 to 7 blogs on a monthly basis, and then building around that and other thing. What is the gestation period around this in terms of like impact of that content on down the funnel activities?
That's a good question. So I think content in general takes time. It takes the best way I like to explain this is it takes longer than you think it might, but it doesn't take as long as you would expect, right? So it depends on a couple things. One, I would say, is the first factor is really the goals behind investing in content. Like, what are you doing it for? If it's to support sales, so solely to support sales, to get that 2% that we were talking about, in that case, I would think the impact should be pretty quick, because really you're distributing it directly to your prospects and you're getting feedback almost instantly. If it's more of a 98% thing where it's brand awareness mixed with funnel, sort of velocity, etc., in that case, it really depends on the distribution channel. And SEO in general, I would say, takes between 3 to 6 months. It really depends on how much you invest into it. For me, SEO it's something that content plays a role in SEO. Content quality rather plays a role in SEO for sure. But the determining factor there is the amount of money you're willing to invest, because things like backlinking and digital PR, all these things, they impact SEO massively, and you can shorten your return period or your payback pretty significantly by investing in it. Other forms of distribution, like say influencer collaboration or distribution on social media, or perhaps even something like running a podcast and repurposing that to webinars or video distribution, all of that, it really depends on how well you target your audience. So there's no real payback time, sort of definitive payback time, that anyone can give. As a rule of thumb, I would say that if a particular distribution channel hasn't been giving you any sort of noticeable improvement or leads over the course of a quarter, I would say it's probably time to change things up. That is a good
So three
rule of
months is
thumb.
the kind of gestation period where we keep looking at things, and you have to figure out in 1 or 2 iterations whether it works or not.
Yeah, and iterations really is the key over there. It's not about just publishing once and then just waiting for results, right? You have to repurpose it, you have to redistribute it, and you have to kind of do that within a certain time period. But over what we have found is over the course of a quarter, you generally tend to know which channel is working, what is not working. If you've been focusing entirely on social media, for example, you can look at the engagement you're receiving on your posts. You can look at the number of conversions you're getting from, conversions and traffic you're getting from social media. Is it relevant? Is it not relevant? You generally get a feel for it. So again, I wouldn't say it's a very metrics based decision, but it's more of a feel based thing. Definitely within a quarter, you'll know what's working, what's not. So yeah.
Got it. And I think you made a very good point around repurposing content, and it's not something like, for example, you have a podcast, you have, let's say, a webinar or a video interview, and then you can repurpose it in multiple forms. You can have a social post on it on LinkedIn. You can have a TikTok video, which is more simple. You can also have a Twitter thread, which is one way, or X thread, which is now. Or you can also have it as a blog or a ebook or a playbook, which can come out of that. This kind of like, of course, each is a very, very different medium, very different in terms of number of characters, limitations, and also this thing. Can you help us understand like what you need to look at if you're trying to repurpose content, and what are the kind of any kind of guidelines around repurposing content, what you shouldn't do and what you can look at how to do? Because in a broad level, it just looks very simple to say that, okay, take one content and repurpose it, but at a execution level, it's not the same thing. And so
Yeah, it's true. Repurposing, frankly, Repurposing is something that we recommend all our clients do. In fact, when we sort of propose a content strategy and conduct content audits, etc., one of the things that we almost always end up recommending is that focus on repurposing and redistribution over new content creation. Because if you go back to content marketing, one of the reasons it works well is because it reduces your CAC, right? So if you're constantly creating new content, you're kind of going against that goal of reducing your acquisition cost, because you're constantly pumping money into your content. And if you're constantly doing that, it means that your older content is probably not working too well. So repurposing and redistribution is something that is very important, and it produces a ton of benefits, right? So, with regards to repurposing, what not to do is quite straightforward. It is, don't copy paste content. You publish something on social media, don't just copy paste that. The idea really is to always add more to the conversation, right? So, a good example of this would be, let's say you published something 2 years ago, right? And it's a bit outdated now because of new data, market developments, whatever. A good way of repurposing it would be to re-examine that piece and to be very transparent about it, and to say that, hey, we wrote this 2 years ago, things have changed, so let's look at how things have changed, and then you can do a before and after sort of comparison, right? So this is one example of repurposing. Repurposing across different channels is also another way of doing it. In that case, when repurposing across channels, one of the things that I would suggest is to focus on individual talking points within a larger piece of content and use that as a springboard for further discussion. So, for example, you have a huge pillar page that talks about 4 or 5 different use cases for your product. Run a webinar on one use case, right? And then maybe run a Twitter or X thread on another use case, for example. I think zeroing in on individual conversations like that works very well in just sort of breaking up large pieces of content, making it more digestible, and just creating more conversations. So that's how I would approach repurposing. And if you repurpose your content, you're automatically redistributing it, because you need to publicize it somehow. So, you're taking something that's a blog post, which is SEO or whatever, a targeted paid distribution, whatever, turning that into social media, which is another channel, maybe getting an influencer's thoughts on things, maybe getting somebody from your ICP or your customers to talk about some of those issues, get them on a webinar, host a panel on Zoom. It's all redistribution, right? And it is repurposing. So the
Got
core of it is really just adding to the conversation. That's how I would approach it.
it. Got it. So you would have, I mean, over your career, you would have seen good amount of content going really viral, doing extremely well. That is from a blog post or a case study basis. Similarly, around the social post and other things. Any patterns around it? What takes some content just to blast off the charts?
A lot of it is luck, because so much of it is ruled by algorithms, right? I mean, you just, when you're publishing content, you don't know what's going to go viral. You don't know what's going to hit the spot, which is why, you know re as I said before, the iterative approach is so important, because you need to keep releasing that content, you need to keep redistributing, repurposing. It's only then do you get a proper idea of whether your content is a good fit or not. Publishing once and just waiting for it, you're not going to know. If it goes viral, great, but there is a certain amount of luck in it, I think. In terms of going viral, I think it comes down to very simple things. It's about understanding pain points on a very, very deep level, right? And when I say deep, I mean literally, it's as if your customer is writing that pain point themselves, right? Or expressing that themselves through your words or through your video or whatever. And that takes some experience to get to, right? You're not, the idea that you can get it right the first time is a bit unrealistic, because learning about your ICPs and your personas, even that is an iterative process. The more content you publish, the more feedback you get, the more you learn. So, yeah, going viral, I mean, I would never make that a goal. But to be perfectly honest with you, if I knew what it took to go viral all the time, I would be extremely viral right now. So, and I would have, sort of bottled that and given it to every single client of mine, right? So, truth be told, I would say it comes down to getting a few basics right, and then praying like hell. So,
Experimenting. So at a fundamental level, it's about experimenting, finding the right path to what it makes work, and it's that grit and grunt work which we need to do before rather like expecting some kind of a supernormal results around anything.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, going viral is a very exceptional result, speaking statistically, and expecting something that is so outside the norm all the time, it's a bit unrealistic, right? So, yeah, it's like you said, it's more about doing that grunt work, just making sure you're doing the basics right, and then hoping for the best. So, yeah.
That's great. I mean, it's refreshing in terms of this kind of conversation because most of the time we hear about more larger promises and very kind of like open-ended statements around like you have to figure out these things and you have to do it this way. Well, it's at the end of the day, it's also good to hear like, okay, this requires time, this requires patience, this requires hard work, this requires good amount of going through the process and hoping some luck also comes across this just there
Yeah,
so that
absolutely.
that makes it the same. And of course one other thing which is something which I'm more kind of obligated to ask, given the large language models which have come across, and there are multiple companies which come around that, where like you have the Jaspers, you have the Pepper Contents, you have so many companies, content companies using AI, and content marketers around AI is also coming through. And there are different kind of scenarios which come through, like, okay, would it make them more productive, would it make them more creative, would it make SEO kind of like less relevant? Can you throw your kind of opinions around this?
Yeah, it's funny. Like AI in content was such a huge topic on all these content marketing communities for like 2 or 3 months, a few months ago, and now nobody talks about it anymore. So it's almost like it went viral for a
Fad
while, and
which
then yeah, exactly. Like everybody was talking about it, and I swear, even my mom asked me about it. She's like, "Oh, AI has come. Like, is your business in danger?" I was like, "No, just calm down. Like I swear, So yeah, AI is interesting. I think I'm a sort of I believe that AI is good for marketing in general and also content marketing as well, because it takes care of a lot of the grunt work that you need to do in content marketing. Something as simple as keyword groupings when you're doing SEO research, right? It used to it used to take us about 2 hours or 3 hours just to do something like that. And I mean, now we can do it in less than a minute because the AI just does it for you. It's fantastic. I mean, yes, it makes things up in between and it does that. You still need a human in the loop, but it reduces the grunt work. That is one thing. The other thing is a lot of, I would say, generic content that frankly is not enjoyable to create. Stuff like, glossaries or what else, high level definitions of certain terms. Glossary like content, in short, basic, very basic how to's. AI is much better suited for this, right? And I know a lot of companies with their programmatic SEO campaigns, they're actively using AI and it's working very well for them. It's giving them huge ROI. So, in that sense, it's great. But I think, like with everything, you need to draw a line somewhere, right? So, the programmatic SEO is a good example, actually, because one of our clients, that's why they came to us. They had this huge library of about almost, I think, 6,000 pages that they'd created programmatically. Massive campaign, and they got a lot of traffic from it. But ultimately, when I was talking to the head of content, the thing he said was, okay, we have all this content, but whenever we go to these industry talk shows or communities, everyone still mentions our competitor, right? Our brand awareness is still lower than compared to theirs. So what do we do? I was like, yeah, well, I mean, SEO is not going to work for brand awareness, right? It's just taking a machine gun to a huge target, just hoping something sticks. Things like targeted distribution, engaging in communities, creating user generated content, that's the kind of stuff that moves the needle in terms of brand awareness, right? And it's where I think real content marketing comes in. So, in many ways, AI has shrunk the world of content marketing or the overall scope of it, but it has shrunk it to activities that really make a difference, which is something I'm quite thankful for, because content marketers are, you know, in the next 5 years, I think content marketers will no longer be expected to roll out tofu SEO blogs based on generic keyword research, sorting by keyword difficulty on Ahrefs, and then just publishing those. You can just tap into OpenAI's API and get that done, right? So in that sense, AI has been great. It's really just reduced the scope of content to the few things that really make a difference. And that's been a very good progression in my opinion. In terms of pure writing, which is what a lot of the content marketing world seems to be obsessed with, I think this is a this is a digression, but I think a lot of content marketers inadvertently, they are obsessed with content. They're not obsessed enough with marketing, right? They're only focused on creating content. They're not really thinking about how we're going to distribute it, or who's going to read this, or how will they read it, more importantly. So that's a different subject. But in terms of pure content creation, in terms of pure content writing, video creation, AI has taken away many jobs. There's no denying that. I know a lot of freelance writers who were starting out, they don't have gigs anymore. So in that sense, they're shifting towards becoming, SDRs and BDRs, right? Because that's gonna sort of, they can make a living that way. So in that sense, it has had a negative impact. A lot of talented writers have been leaving the content marketing space. A lot of companies have also massively misunderstood AI, which is why there's a huge sort of glut of quality content marketing talent on the market right now. I mean, pretty much every company is laying off people, and content marketing is usually the first place they start because content is usually not easily attributed. And secondly, everyone is talking about how AI can do content now. And I think we'll see a correction in the next few months where companies realize that, oh, okay, content ChatGPT cannot write this thought leadership article for me because it's just making things up, right? So I think we will see some kind of a reversal to the mean. But yeah, it's been positive and negative, but I think in the long run, it is a net positive. So yeah,
Got
the other big impact, of course, has been to SEO. And to be honest, I think it's still a work in progress in terms of how it'll impact SEO, because the way I see it, AI is really, the way I understand it, AI at this point in Google or in Bing is really an extension of Google's snippet, right? It's a zero click search. Google was always providing you the snippet when you read it, when you needed simple definitions. It was providing the people also ask section when you needed specific questions answered. There are so many sub features on there now that the value of ranking in the top 10 will decrease in the long run. That doesn't mean SEO is dead. It just means that you need to prioritize other distribution tactics as well. So AI has had that change too, which for me, as I said, it's a net positive because as a content marketer, you get to focus now on things that really move the needle and actually, ironically, help attribution, because you can clearly point and say that this campaign that I ran to these particular channels with these communities, this is how much ROI you got. This is the traffic conversions you got. So it makes it a lot easier in that sense, I think.
Actually, you made a very interesting point. Companies go after content marketing teams first, mostly because it's not something which can be easily attributed to revenue. Why would you say that it's very difficult to attribute impact of content, or like how a particular content influenced a buyer journey to pipeline or leads or revenue? Why would that be the situation?
Yeah, because I think it's easy enough to assign revenue across a funnel. You can see the buyer's journey and you can see which pages they visited, and you can break down your revenue across those pages quite easily. The problem is that doesn't give you the impact, right? So, as a sample, I can illustrate one of the buyer journeys of one of our clients recently. I left a comment on some random post on LinkedIn. This person, she read it. She thought that, okay, this guy makes sense. She checked out my LinkedIn profile. She checked out our website. She visited our contact us page. She saw how we work. She clicked through some of our, the blog posts over there. She's like, okay, these guys don't sound stupid. And then she's like, okay, book a discovery call. On the discovery call, she realized that, okay, these guys make even more sense. So then we had a proposal, we signed, so on. How do I attribute that? The real impact in this entire journey was that LinkedIn comment that I left, but there's no way I can attribute anything to that, right? But social media content is also content, right?
Oh,
I can
that's
say that, okay, as a channel, I'm getting this much traffic from it, but on an individual level, it's quite difficult to attribute it. And it goes back to, that revenue that we closed. Every piece of content and page that they visited, it played a role. But how do I know which was the most impactful? If I remove a certain page from that process, would I have lost the sale? I don't know. What if I had included a new piece of content in there? Would I have closed the sale faster? I don't know. It's not easy to answer these questions. And for me, I think if you compare that to paid ads, right, it's a very one to one. And I know this is a very high level sort of comparison and quite generic, but it's just to show the contrast really. With a paid ad with outbounds, I know exactly what I can do. If I change the copy on my ad, right, on an A B test, I can clearly see what my ROAS is going to be. I can't do that with content. So I think in a lot of companies that are very sales driven, that need to attribute everything, to measure everything, it works against content marketing. So that's what I meant by attribution being challenging.
No, it's a very, very actually counterintuitive point as well, because one is like you can measure influence of content, but you won't be able to measure impact of content. Of course, technically, yes, it is possible to measure the impact of a LinkedIn post, because from the referral, what is the initial referral, you would know it came from LinkedIn. So you would know
Yep.
your social activities has brought in that lead. You would know
Yep.
that particular buyer did see some of the blogs, and then eventually he signed up. There was a discovery call, and then he became a customer. But of
Yep.
course, you wouldn't know, if not for this content, if some other content would have been there, would it have delayed the conversion or would it have accelerated the conversion? If this
Yeah.
content itself was not there, would he have still not done the discovery call?
Yeah. Exactly.
And
And
there would have been so many other ifs and the thing. But so the impact is not there, but influence can, of course, surely be seen.
yeah, exactly. And just going back to that paid example, right? I mean, you can A/B test your ads, but I can't A/B test
Yeah.
a strategy. Goes back to your point. Like, I don't know what was the impact there.
Got
So
it.
yeah,
And that's a very interesting nuance also, where like how attribution between channel efforts or paid efforts versus attribution to content efforts, how it is both different. And it's
yeah,
not the same kind of, it's attribution and content is more around influence, while attribution around ads is more about impact and actual ROI is the thing which comes through. That's a very
yeah,
interesting thought process. And that's something which is always a blind spot, which this is one blind spot or one kind of a new insight which I got here. Thanks a lot for that.
yeah. You're
And
welcome.
moving out beyond content marketing, beyond other thing, and you have been in a career, and you, as you mentioned, it's like a lot of content marketers are getting laid off or out of job, or even individual freelance influencers, and they are becoming SDRs and BDRs and other things. But content is a pretty universal skill. As a written communication, you can be a great SDR, you can be a great salesperson, you can actually also be an ad copyist, which is there. So at
Yeah.
this current times, what would you advise, let's say, junior content writers or freelance content writers, what they can do within the realms of their skill set? What would be a career advice from your side?
To be honest, I don't know, because if it's an in-house kind of role, I was laid off, right? I got laid off when I started an agency, so do that, right? But no, I'm just joking. But yeah, I think at a basic level, I would say definitely familiarize yourself with AI. Something that's been interesting is that I know at a lot of the larger companies, content departments have been sort of working on prompt engineering. It's sounds like a really fancy thing, but designing prompts really, because it is quite challenging, to be honest. Personally, I have issues with it. Like, our strategist, for example, like one of our strategists, he has no problems getting decent content from ChatGPT whenever he's experimented. But I try the same thing. My prompts are just not good enough to get that sort of content out. And I think it is a skill. And I think as AI improves, it will become more of a skill. So that would be one suggestion, just like familiarize yourself with AI and get that experience in, because I think the whole AI augmented content workflow is going to become bigger as time goes on. Yeah, the other thing I would say is definitely niche down, specialize in, if possible, specialize in niches that AI is not going to work well in, right? Fintech is a good example where you need human input. You cannot absolutely, at this point, fire up AI and expect the output to be anywhere close to publishing ready. Technical niches like cybersecurity, industrial manufacturing, CNC machining, and all these really sort of esoteric niches. I think that's where really a lot of value still, is present for a content writer. So I would say niching down and just really focusing on creating content that has an impact on company bottom lines, and that would be the best thing I can think of at this point. So yeah.
No, that's great. I mean, it's a good set of inputs which can come through as well. The same. One last thing, with regard to as a content marketer and a content marketing agency, what is the kind of tech stack do you use?
So we actually have our own software because we tend to gather data from different sources. So we kind of have a software that where everything runs on Excel basically and spreadsheets. So that is our major, I would say, in terms of a tech stack, which it sounds a bit legacy, I know, saying Excel and spreadsheets, but frankly, it's what works best for us. Um, Keywords research tools are, I would say, one step above that. Tools like Ahrefs, SEMrush, etc. That works. Analytics, Search Console, that would be the next layer. And then I would say also social listening tools to a certain extent. I think at a larger agency with enterprise clients, tools like Meltwater or something like that might make a lot of sense. But we still are a boutique agency. And, for us, tools like SparkToro tend to work very well because we can quickly understand how an audience is spread out and what the web is, so to speak, what hashtags are trending, what topics are trending. It's excellent for general research, I would say. So that would be about as complicated as the marketing stack gets. Yeah. Usually the project management stack is really complex because you have Notion, you have, ClickUp and all these things coming in there. But, we've just migrated all that to spreadsheets. So it works for us. So yeah, nothing too complex.
Oh, that's great. I think thanks a lot for that. Also, it will be also helpful to know like what kind of tools which, let's say, even a startup and others need to actually equip themselves with to start with, from a kind of like starting with the basic set of content marketing and content distribution. As I said, uh, moving away from the topic and technical topic,
Yeah.
because yeah, sorry. The last question which I have would be is like,
No,
if
yeah.
from your own experience as a content marketer, what are the kind of books which you would recommend to other content marketers, or
Oh,
or
it's
anyone to
a good
follow? It
point.
can
I
be
don't.
now books is maybe even social,
Yeah.
or who do you follow, or
Yeah, the reason I sort of hesitated at books is because I don't read marketing books too much. As I said, I'm a writer, so I tend to read a lot of literature and all that stuff. So nonfiction generally doesn't really interest me too much. So I'm not a good source for that. But in social circles like within LinkedIn and within Twitter, there is a lot of knowledge. And personally, that's how I learned about content marketing as well. It didn't come from a book. It was basically experience and just reading people's posts. I think there's a lot of good sort of people out there to follow. Yeah, I think, pretty much all the usual suspects. I mean, you literally just type in content marketing, you'll see a bunch of people pop up. I particularly, if you're interested mostly in writing and the impact that content writing has, people like Tommy Walker are good to follow. He hosts a show. I don't know if he still does it, but he used to host a show called The Cutting Room, where he would literally just go through examples of content and how he would edit it, how he would change it. That was very helpful for me as a freelancer, just in terms of understanding what companies look for. Ryan Law is not very active on socials these days, but he used to be the CMO at Animals. In terms of content thought leadership, his stuff was always something that I read. I always enjoyed it. And then, yeah, some other people that I follow are mutual friend Haris Pahich or Calvin Blanc, as we know. He's more generically marketing, but yeah, he has some good ideas about content. I found he may
yes,
lack the practicalities of it, but he has some really good ideas about the philosophy behind it. So I do enjoy reading it. Other people, I'm not on Twitter much, so most of my stuff is from LinkedIn. I do follow Masuma Memon on LinkedIn. She makes a lot of sense. She's been in content marketing for a while now. People like Hiba Amin as well. She heads up content at copy.ai. She's pretty good at it. Also, John Bonini at Databox, or formerly at
yes.
Databox. He was excellent. And in fact, his playbooks on distribution are pretty much what we do because it just makes a lot of sense. And in terms of ROI, they're the best. Other people are, I would say Ryan Stewart. Ryan Stewart is very SEO oriented, but again, It is a subset of content marketing, and he tends to make a lot of sense in terms of the ops side of things. And I think that's about all I can think of. A lot of good conversations actually happen in communities. So I'm a part of quite a few. Demand Curve and then Superpath as well. Superpath, I think, is more content oriented. So definitely the conversations in there are pretty excellent. So there's no personality or individual that I would recommend there, but just generally, it's a lot of folks who are practicing content marketing. So the conversations are of huge value. So those would be some resources that I would recommend.
That's great. Kind of a list as well, and quite a few members there for me to go and track as well, especially on the content distribution side as a startup founder as well. And thanks a lot, Vivek. This has been a very, very, very interesting conversation for me personally, because it gave a lot of counterintuitive points for me to think about. And I think it would give to our audience as well. And we would create a lot more learning material from this. So thanks a lot again for this, Vivek, and very good afternoon and rest of the week also for you.
Yeah, sure. Thanks a lot. Thanks for having me on. Always a pleasure.